Welcome to Eye Overstanding. Let's begin. From Genesis to Revelation, the Bible spans 3 continents and thousands of years. But where are these ancient kingdoms today? Let's discover where the locations mentioned in the biblical world exist on today's current map. Egypt, known in Hebrew as Mizraim. Referenced in Exodus 12, where God delivered the Israelites from 400 years of slavery through 10 devastating plagues, culminating in the Passover and the miraculous parting of the Red Sea. In Genesis 41, Joseph rose from prisoner to Pharaoh's second-in-command by interpreting dreams of famine. Egypt represents both bondage and God's deliverance. Assyria, now northern Iraq. In 2 Kings 17, the brutal Assyrian Empire conquered the northern kingdom of Israel in 722 BC, scattering the 10 tribes forever. In Jonah 3, God sent the reluctant prophet Jonah to preach repentance to Nineveh, and the entire city turned to God. Assyria shows both judgment and mercy. Babylon, southern Iraq today. In 2 Kings 25, Nebuchadnezzar's armies destroyed Jerusalem and Solomon's temple in 586 BC, carrying Judah into 70 years of exile. Daniel 6 tells how the prophet Daniel was thrown into a den of lions for praying to God, yet was miraculously preserved. Babylon represents captivity, but also God's faithfulness in exile. Persia, modern-day Iran. The Book of Esther tells how Jewish Queen Esther risked her life to save her people from genocide under King Xerxes. In Ezra 1, the Persian king Cyrus issued a decree freeing the Jews to return and rebuild Jerusalem's temple, fulfilling Isaiah's prophecy made 150 years earlier. Persia shows God working through pagan kings. Aram, known today as Syria. In Acts 9, Saul of Tarsus was traveling to Damascus to arrest Christians when Jesus appeared in blinding light, transforming him into Paul the Apostle. In 2 Kings 5, Naaman, the Syrian army commander, was healed of leprosy by obeying the prophet Elisha. Syria witnessed dramatic conversions. Phoenicia, the coastal cities of Tyre and Sidon, now Lebanon. In Matthew 15, Jesus healed the demon-possessed daughter of a Canaanite woman from this region, praising her great faith. In 1 Kings 5, King Hiram of Tyre provided the famous cedars of Lebanon to build Solomon's temple. Phoenicia supplied materials for God's house. Canaan, Israel, Judah the Promised Land, now Israel, and the West Bank. In Joshua 1-12, Israel conquered Canaan under Joshua's leadership. This land witnessed Jesus' entire earthly ministry, his birth in Bethlehem, teachings in Galilee, crucifixion in Jerusalem, and resurrection. This is the geographic heart of biblical history. Ammon, Moab, and Edom, modern Jordan. In Numbers 20, these nations refused Israel passage to the Promised Land. The book of Ruth tells how Ruth the Moabitess left her homeland to follow Naomi to Israel, becoming an ancestor of King David and Jesus Christ. Jordan shows redemption crossing ethnic boundaries. Arabia and Sheba, Saudi Arabia, and Yemen today. In 1 Kings 10, the wealthy queen of Sheba traveled hundreds of miles to test Solomon's wisdom and was amazed by his God-given insight. In Galatians 1:17, Paul retreated to Arabia after his conversion for a time of revelation. Arabia represents seeking divine wisdom. Cush, translated Ethiopia in older Bibles, now Sudan and Ethiopia. In Acts 8, Philip met an Ethiopian eunuch, explained Isaiah 53, and baptized him, bringing the gospel to Africa. Cush represents the gospel spreading to all nations. Of the Chaldeans in southern Iraq, now the archaeological site el-Muqayyar. In Genesis 11:31, God called Abraham to leave this prosperous city and journey to an unknown land. Abraham obeyed by faith, becoming the father of Israel and all believers. Represents the call to abandon security for God's promises. Asia Minor, modern Turkey. Revelation 2-3 addresses 7 churches here, each receiving specific commendations and warnings from Jesus. In Acts 13:14, Paul established churches in Lystra, Iconium, and Antioch. Turkey was early Christianity's heartland. Greece, specifically Macedonia and Achaia. In Acts 16, Paul received a vision of a Macedonian man pleading, "Come over and help us," bringing the gospel to Europe. Paul preached on Mars Hill in Athens and established thriving churches in Thessalonica, Philippi, Corinth, and Berea. Cyprus, island homeland of Barnabas in Acts 4:36. In Acts 13, Paul and Barnabas began their first missionary journey here. The proconsul Sergius Paulus believed after Paul struck the sorcerer Elymas blind. Cyprus was where Paul's Gentile mission began. Crete, a Greek island. Paul left his disciple Titus here to appoint elders and organize the church. In Acts 27, Paul's ship stopped at Crete during his perilous voyage to Rome. Crete needed strong leadership for young churches. Rome, capital of Italy and the ancient world. In Acts 28, Paul arrived as a prisoner and spent 2 years under house arrest, boldly preaching about Jesus. He wrote Ephesians, Philippians, Colossians, and Philemon from Roman chains. Tradition says Paul and Peter were martyred here. Rome became the center of early Christianity despite persecution. Spain, possibly biblical Tarshish. In Jonah 1, the prophet fled toward Tarshish, trying to escape God's call. In Romans 15:24, Paul expressed his desire to visit Spain. Spain represents both flight from and pursuit of God's purposes. Cyrene in Libya. In Mark 15:21, Simon of Cyrene was compelled to carry Jesus' cross. In Acts 2:10, Cyrenian Jews were present at Pentecost. Cyrene participated in Christianity's pivotal moments. Libya, called Put in Hebrew. Ezekiel 35 lists Libya among Egypt's allies who would fall under God's judgment. Nahum 3:9 mentions Put supporting Thebes. Libya represented military alliances in the ancient world. Malta, the island where Acts 27-28 records Paul's dramatic shipwreck. After reaching shore, Paul was bitten by a viper but suffered no harm. He healed the governor's father and many others. Malta shows God's protection and power in crisis. Dalmatia or Illyricum, now Croatia and the Balkans. In Romans 15:19, Paul describes preaching from Jerusalem all the way around to Illyricum. In 2 Timothy 4:10, Titus departed for Dalmatia. The Balkans marked the northwest frontier of Paul's missionary work. Gaul, possibly connected to Galatia, located in Asia Minor, now called Turkey. Paul's letter to the Galatians addresses churches drifting from grace back to law-keeping. Galatians 2:20 declares, "I have been crucified with Christ. It is no longer I who live, but Christ lives in me." Ararat, modern Armenia. In Genesis 8:4, after the flood, Noah's Ark came to rest on the mountains of Ararat. This location represents New Beginnings, God's covenant, and the rainbow as an eternal sign. India, mentioned in Esther 1:1 as the eastern boundary of King Ahasuerus' Persian Empire. It stretched from India to Cush, 127 provinces. India represents the far reaches of the ancient biblical world. Magog, Meshesh, and Tubal debated locations possibly in Russia, Central Asia, or Turkey. Ezekiel 38-39 prophesies a future invasion of Israel by Gog from the land of Magog. Revelation 28 mentions Gog and Magog. These represent symbolic forces opposing God's people in the last days. From the Nile to the Tigris, from Rome to Jerusalem, from Ethiopia to Greece, the Bible tells one unified story of God reaching humanity across every border. These aren't just ancient names on a map. They're testimonies of God's faithfulness through every generation. Which location surprised you most? Comment below and subscribe to explore more biblical history.